Can a posthumously published, incompletely edited novel be better than a novel that was completed and edited by its author? Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my series on reading Bad Hemingway. In July, I read Islands in the Stream. Jack the Rambling Raconteur was kind enough to kind of buddy read it along with me so we could share and exchange ideas about the novel, and I wanted to share what I thought about it here because, you know, this is a part of a series that I've been doing about reading the Hemingway novels, which, you know, are bad, whether they're published during his lifetime or after. That's what we're focusing on. So July, I read Islands in the Stream. This was published posthumously by the Hemingway family, sons, ex-wife, trust, whatever it was, decided to publish it. And according to the introduction, the book that we get is pretty much the book that Hemingway had written up to that point. So unlike some posthumous novels, there aren't, you know, bits added on. It's not finished by somebody else. This is, you know, all Hemingway's work, all Hemingway's writing. It's just that it hasn't been edited. That neither he, or completely edited, neither he or an editor at his publisher Scribner's got a hold of it and actually edited it to make it better. And that shows. It shows so much, I think, in this book that I think if this book had been edited, if the editing process has been completed by an editor who could control Hemingway, who could say, these things have to go, this is too much, you know, this doesn't make any sense, then what you would have here is a much shorter and a much better novel than, you know, several of the novels I think that Hemingway published during his lifetime. It would certainly be better than Across the River into the Trees, which I reviewed and talked about in June. It would be better than To Have and Have Not, which was the first Bad Hemingway I read, I think, back in May. This would have been a good novel because it is, even as it stands right now, it is a good novel. It has a lot of the excesses of Hemingway's style, a lot of the excesses of his preoccupations, and things like that, but it's still a good novel. So the novel is broken into three parts. One part is subtitled Bimini, the other part is, I think, Cuba, or Havana, and the third part is At Sea. And literally these are three kind of novella-length stories about a man, an artist named Thomas Hudson, and essentially kind of how his life sort of falls apart as he lives in and around islands in the Caribbean. So the first section, Bimini, we see Thomas Hudson, the artist. His home there has survived a hurricane, I believe. We see him interact with his friends who are kind of hard drinking people, hard living people, and he is preparing, along with the servants who work in his home, he is preparing for the arrival of his three sons. His sons are the products of two different marriages, and he's preparing for their arrival. They come down, you know, according to agreement with their mothers. They come visit him for, I think, 6 weeks every summer. His oldest son is the product of his first marriage, and then his two younger sons are the product of his second. Now, if you know anything about Hemingway's biography, this essentially is exactly the setup of Hemingway's family and his sons and his wives and ex-wives, and he frequently uses this book, I think, to attack and say demeaning things about his ex-wives, even though he's really nice to his first wife here in Island Tree. So that should be a hint that Thomas Hudson, like a lot of, I think, Hemingway heroes or main characters, is in some way a stand-in for Hemingway himself, and I think in a real way more of a stand-in than most of the other characters. And so in a lot of ways I think we see Hemingway thinking back on his life and writing regrets or resentments into this book. The Bimini section has just a great description of a fist fight, I thought, a great description of deep sea fishing, far better than anything in To Have and Have Not. You know, it's got some exciting set pieces. I think the Thomas Hudson character here is described well and largely sympathetically, even if some of the things he does and his friends do aren't great. And then it ends in that section ends in tragedy. The next section is set in Cuba. I can't remember if it's called Cuba or Havana, sorry. And this section is, I think, of the three sections of the book, this is the least successful. Here we see Thomas Hudson living in Cuba and has some connection with the United States government and Secret Service and things like that, or not Secret Service, the CIA or the proto-CIA at the time. And he really is just kind of wallowing in the tragedy that happens in the aftermath of the tragedy that happens at the beginning and at the end of the Bimini section. And there's a whole lot about cats, way too much about cats in this section. There's a whole long scene set in a bar and about drinking and about, how many daiquiris, you drink for the record. By the way, I think Hemingway holds the record for the number of daiquiris drunk at a certain bar in Havana somewhere. And then one of his ex-wives, I think his most recent ex-wife shows up, or one of his ex-wives shows up, and that then kind of falls apart and leads to a lot of acrimony and bitterness, and that section also reveals another tragedy that Thomas Hudson has suffered in his life. And then the third section, I think, is actually a fairly exciting, fairly well written, again it needs to be edited, section called At Sea, in which Thomas Hudson is using his fishing boat to patrol for German submarines off the coast of Cuba, which is something, or in the Caribbean, which is something that Hemingway also did. So again, notice that Hemingway's biography is here. And it is a story which involves a chase of some German submariners who escaped from a submarine that was sunk, ambushes, there's set piece violence, there's a lot of talk about, tracking these people down, boats getting stuck, all kinds of stuff like that. And, if that's your thing, I think it's pretty well done. Again, I would say it definitely needs an editor. And one of the things I think that plays out most directly in this section is the struggle that Thomas Hudson has with alcohol. This is present through all three sections, but it's in this section where he seems to be trying to get a hold of that and gain some control over that, not with a lot of help from the people around him, and he is kind of determined to carry out this mission to find these German mariners who've been stranded somewhere around Cuba when their U-boat sank, or was sunk. So, it's kind of an interesting, I think at times, exciting story. It ends in a way in which I think if you've read much Hemingway, you would know that it ends, so I won't give that away here. But I really thought that section was pretty good. So, for me, with Islands in the Stream, what you have is what should have been a really good Hemingway novel. Yes, it's put together like from three sections, kind of in the way that To Have and Have Not is put together from two sections, but here the three sections actually seem to have a lot more to do with one another, and it tells a continuous story all the way through. I think there are some great examples of Hemingway's writing, his ability to write action scenes and to describe those things well and interesting in an exciting way. There's also, I will say, the resentment of later Hemingway shows up in the pages here where he takes on certain authors or his ex-wives. There is, it is a gloomy, kind of morbid book in lots of ways, in which Hemingway goes through some of his regrets, some of his weaknesses, some of his hopes, and then imagines tragedy and how that might affect him and how he might come through it or not come through it. But it is, I think, a far more interesting book than Across the River and Into the Trees, a far better executed book than that book, or To Have and Have Not. And if you are someone who likes Hemingway, and you don't mind taking on, I think it's around 450-page novel, which probably should have been around 350 pages if you had an editor cut all the excess out, then I think you will find the book itself to be fairly rewarding. It's not that there aren't clunkers in terms of sentences and dialogue and, events that are in there, but if those had all been edited out, I think what you end up with is a pretty good Hemingway novel. Anyway, there you go. There are my thoughts on Islands in the Stream. I'll leave a link to the other videos I have about reading Bad Hemingway that I've done so far. This is August. I was going to read The Garden of Eden, another posthumously published Hemingway novel in August, but I'm not going to get to it, so I'm going to put that one off and read that in September, and then I'll make a video of that one. Anyway, if you have thoughts about Island in the Stream, Hemingway, posthumous novels, novels and even editing, whatever it is, please leave those thoughts in the comments section down below, and as always, thank you for watching.